Hello. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Saisha Grayson. I'm the curator of time-based media at the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. I'm pleased to welcome you all to tonight's event, a screening and conversation centered on Leslie Thornton's avant-garde classic, Peggy and Fred in Kansas. This event is part of Viewfinder, Women's Film and Video from the Smithsonian, a year-long virtual screening and conversation series featuring an array of moving image works by women across Smithsonian collections and generously supported by the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative. Though we gather tonight in cyberspace, tuning in, I assume, from many different locations, we are grateful for and acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homeland we each sit, including the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home in DC, where my physical museum is, and where I am in Lenape-Hoking, also known as New York City. For more on the Lenape, also known as Delaware tribe, visit their official tribal website, which we're including in the chat. And if you want to learn more about the Native peoples and histories where you are sitting, cross-reference the digital map Native Lands and the National Congress of American Indians list of current tribal representation. Those are useful tools to begin. The Viewfinder series has been an invigorating exploration of women's time-based art and expression across the Smithsonian collections, and as of now, across two themes. We started the year with 6 months focused on the idea of interiority, understood physically, psychologically, or otherwise. And we found that a particularly resonant theme as the pandemic was keeping us all at home. And now, since July, we've been highlighting works that emphasize the external forces that shape the way we move through and experience the world. Again, seemingly very timely at this moment when how we navigate the world is so impacted by other choices. As I'll touch on in a moment, I believe this program and Leslie's work really uniquely bridge these two modes, the external and the internal, and I hope that's something we can consider with more depth in our discussion. Some housekeeping. The live Zoom screenings for this Viewfinder series occur on the first Thursday of every month. And next month's program is Laurel Nakadade on tragedy in the everyday with a selection from the Hirshhorn Museum's collection. And that's on September 2nd at 5:30. For more information about upcoming events in the series, please visit womenshistory.si.edu, also linked in the chat. And while viewing this program on Zoom, we recommend that you select gallery or active speaker in the top right corner of your screen in order to better see our panelists in the presentation. And we have live captioning available, which can be accessed along the bottom menu. That's also where you'll find the Q&A function. And we really hope that you'll participate and submit questions as you think of them. So don't need to wait till the end as you think of something, as something comes up, pop it in there and we'll be drawing on that for the second half of the event. So those are the logistics, and I'm now very excited to introduce the work of Leslie Thornton, an artist I've admired for decades and that this program has given me a chance to finally connect with in person. This evening's conversation also will include Natalie Bell, the curator at the MIT List Visual Arts Center, and that's where the artist's first US Solo Museum exhibition opens this fall, so she'll have a lot to add as well. When I joined the Smithsonian American Art Museum over 3 years ago, and I was reviewing our video art collection, I was so very happy to see that a favorite of mine, Peggy and Fred in Kansas, was already in our holdings. This work had stuck with me for years since I first saw it in college, as it simultaneously has an unsettling vision of a post-apocalyptic America, a next generation trying to navigate it, and then plunges you into the world of these little humans as they try to make sense of their environment and themselves. It's also a really prescient prefiguration of how intensely media becomes the primary source for socialization and powerfully shapes the performance of self and intervenes in how we see and understand everything outside that self. Fast forward to a year of pandemic lock-ins, existential threats, and hyper-dependence on connective technologies. And suddenly this video went from something I hope to show someday to something I urgently wanted to revisit, share, and discuss. And I'm thankful that today we will get to do exactly that with all of you and the maker herself, so that we can not only go deep into this particular work, which we'll understand as part of the ongoing series, Peggy and Fred in Hell, which Thornton created from 1983 to 2015. And more expansively, we'll talk about it within 40 years of work that repeatedly thematizes the impact of media and technology as tools that are shaped by human bias and ideologies, but are often operating beyond their control. Peggy and Fred in Kansas was the second entry in the multi-chapter project, Peggy and Fred in Hell, and it seeds the core elements and considerations that Thornton teases out then over the next few decades. Her process of open-ended curiosity and reworking of art also rebukes fantasies of mastery and final control, something I also have always appreciated. So speaking of technologies, please note that we are screening over Zoom. So if there are any strange affects or interruptions in the stream, blame the tool and not the content. And I highly encourage everyone to silence phones and close inboxes so that other technologies don't get in the way as we enjoy, without further ado, Peggy and Fred in Kansas. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, everyone. I just love that ending. It's so punk. I love the feeling of them dancing like on the debris of civilization. Well, thank you, Leslie, for that creation and for joining us, and Natalie Bell also joining us. I'm so thankful to be in conversation with you both tonight. So I guess I wanted to admit that I've sort of put my own projection on this. I started by saying why I really wanted to see this film right now and talk about it. But I think, there's some people for whom this will be something they've seen before or fans of yours, but for other people who don't know your work, I don't want to sort of oversubscribe it. So Leslie, why don't you talk about where this project started for you? This became a lifelong project, but this is the early moments of it. So why don't you contextualize it how you would like to?
Okay. Let's see. I planned a film called Peggy and Fred in Hell, in which I was, this is in the early 80s, and I was going to work with two people I'd known for a while and I'd filmed before, adults. The theme of this film, big project, was going to be how technology, humankind making technology that had escaped its control. So at that time, the technology I was thinking about was atomic and nuclear. It was still during the tail end of the Cold War. I grew up in the Cold War. And that's, for those of you who didn't, it really was part of every day. Between what you saw on television, I interrupt this program to announce a bulletin, that sort of thing, and duck and cover and so forth. So that's how I was going to start. Then I met these two kids. They were my neighbors. I moved into a new house. And the day I met them, everything changed. I just decided I'm working with children, and the technology that is escaping or exceeding the scope or scale that we created of this, but our ability to manage it somehow was media. And so that included television. And then of course it went on to include a lot more, because I'll have to include also the internet and everything that turned into. And that's where I started. I made my new house into the set. So I never really actually moved into a proper house, because it immediately became hell. Took a month to build hell. And you don't see you do see a little primary hell here. There were two spaces in our house. And of course I had to ask their family, the parents, if they were okay with this. And it was the father who lived with the kids, and he had a performance background. This is a very 60s origin stuff. He was good friends with the Jefferson Airplane and Janis Joplin, and Peggy was actually named after Janis Joplin. Her real name's Janis.
That's where the energy comes from.
Yeah. So they were from a performing family, actually. I mean, these two kids, and so that is how it started.
Yeah. And I think, there's so much about, as you said, the context of the Cold War, that kind of all pervasiveness that, again, not to project too much forward, but I think that we might be going through a moment where a generation that didn't have that is starting to have a sense of what it feels like to live inside a constant media scape that's telling you about danger and asking you to mediate your own sense of how you can navigate an environment through that.
Yeah.
And so that might be some of this synergy that I was feeling too.
Yeah.
I don't know, both of you have, because of the show you're working on, had an opportunity to revisit this from your own perspectives in this moment. I'm curious, if there were things that when you've been looking at it again that have popped up, in this context, or made you look differently at things that were sort of buried there.
Oh, absolutely.
What we're going through now.
Absolutely. Since I did work on this project over the course of 30-something years, meaning I shot a lot of footage in a period of 8 years with the children. And then I started to produce short works that lined up in a row. I will also say that part of my backstory was post-apocalyptic. The kids were supposedly alone in the world. They could have anything, but they were alone in the world. They learned to be the beings that they were by watching television, which they could still turn on and was being operated by an AI entity. But at the time, and this is in the early 80s, there was a focus occurring around the millennium on the horizon. And there were people, they were called futurologists, I guess, by the media, and predictions made. And there was a phrase that came up that really resonated for me, which was the information explosion. This is in the early 80s. That's one of the writers presented that concern. This isn't pre-cable TV. This is still like only broadcast, a couple channels, a few channels. It really resonated with me. I felt it. And I thought, I'm just like, I will say, I'm just like my dad. My dad is drafted for World War II, wants to work on the atom bomb. What atom bomb? There's no atom bomb. There's no such thing. He was studying physics. He ended up working on the atom bomb. I hear this phrase and I think I can't handle that. And I know it's happening already. And actually also in the arts at the time, there were a few people, I can't think of names offhand, who were focusing on the notion of excess. So these are more typical gallery artists, not film or media people, especially at that time, but just a sense of there is too much. There's coming to be too much.
Yeah.
So revisiting the piece again in the last few years, because I've had a few major shows, including this one. I have this feeling, and then others do as well. It is a prescient work. It's prescient, and we're in it.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in it way more than anybody could have ever guessed.
That's one thing that really interested me, Leslie, if I can interject a little bit, is just the way that Peggy and Fred, you somehow achieve a kind of timelessness with it. And I know sort of strategically some of the ways that you do that. And one that you've talked about with me is using black and white. So, much of it was shot on video, but in black and white video. So, it both kind of blends in with the elements that are originally from film footage, whether it's archival film or your own, but it also sort of denaturalizes the image and sets it in this sort of abstract space that could be historical, but it also could be anything.
Right, and it was a strategic move. Actually, most of it was shot on film.
Say with the internet too, though, it's also like internet cams, right? That moment when the camera is just sort of sitting there and people are living their lives in front of it.
That's right. So,
and that didn't even exist when you were filming this, but it's sort of the tropes that we then get used to in reality television, where there's just a camera that's in the living room, but also the early webcams, many of them were black and white or really pixelated and low, the lighting wasn't great. And so you had that kind of shadow space of kind of wondering what somebody was doing out there, and then they come into focus. So
that's amazing. I had not registered that, but because I'm too old.
Well, I thought of it when Natalie said that, but really thinking that is an aesthetic that sort of stretches from these, the early film to 90s webcam, that somehow all of it seems referenced.
You're right. Well, there wasn't. Well, first of all, I want to just correct one point, Natalie, that you mentioned it, which is that actually almost all of it was shot on 16mm film. And even things that look, some of the stuff that looks archival, I filmed to make it look old. But the choice, there's only a little bit of video. And as it moves, the whole project moves along, there's more. But all of Kansas, except for like those machines, a couple little things, all was shot on film. And that is significant because I was filming a different way than people would film today. Then I also want to add that at the time, there was a lot of concern with surveillance. The technologies of surveillance, and this came up within the arts a lot. People were doing projects related to an apprehension around surveillance, because it was fairly new, or I guess some of it was always there, but the technology, people would do projects where they'd map out, let's say Amsterdam was one I remember, how to walk through Amsterdam without being caught on surveillance. So they'd find all the like blind spots, and that would become a video or some kind of art project. So, okay, I'm missing something. But the way to ensure that everything I was throwing in was going to fit was get rid of color. I don't know how I knew to do that. I mean, actually, I was just too broke to shoot in color, really. So something I say, I'm always saying to myself is, necessity is the mother of invention. So I started out shooting in black and white, and then I just stayed. And that means those kids could get older. I had to keep buying bigger white coats for Fred. I had to let the seams out on Peggy's dress many times. So also to keep them as if it was just one moment, not chronological, not passing through time necessarily. Just keep the costumes the same.
Well, also the episodic format is something that you've talked about as coming of necessity as well.
Oh, yes.
At the same time, of necessity more explicitly out of budget, or lack of, right?
Yeah, but that's
but then it also liberated you in this way to create this sort of open structure that was serial, and then could be sort of mixed and edited in different ways over the years. And the sort of architecture of Peggy and Fred as a cycle is one that I'm still wrapping my head around in every conversation we have, because it's so complex and open-ended and is sort of folded back on itself at different points over the years. And you you can read the scholarship around it, and there's so many final edits that it's almost hard to believe that the final edit you have now is actually final. So
it
I just
is.
want to tee that up for you to talk a little bit about the episodic nature and how that served you over the years.
And I'll add to that, and also sort of the politics of that, like, to what degree was that the mother of invention, and to what degree is there a sort of, implicit politics about finished products or a process that's open, or, sort of how did you think about that, intentionality to keep reworking this material?
Yeah. Well, I'll say one thing is I had so much freedom all along in making this piece, because nobody else cared. In the sense that nobody was invested. I couldn't get any grant money. It was too weird. The stuff we depended on early on, if we made film, which cost a lot, I wasn't like, if I wrote a grant and I say, I'm making a film, it's about everything. It's the apocalypse, and then it's like everything, then you're not going to get money. It's like, it's more complicated than that. But so in fact, I did think when I started shooting, I was making a feature-length film. I finished the first 20 minutes, which was then later called the prologue. It's all shot on film, edited on these big old editing machines for film. And I felt so good about what was there. The thought that I'd have to wait for years, I mean, just to be practical, I'm just saying what actually happened is to wait for years to raise enough money to keep going with this kind of gold mine that seemed to be available to me, working with these people. I really couldn't face it. And I just decided, with a couple friends looking on, hey, go ahead and print it as a film. So that was step one. Then that's a 20-minute long 16mm film. And then I start working more, and I'm cutting on film, but I needed money. So I made Peggy and Fred in Kansas originally. So it's kind of fun. Got the themes out in a condensed way. I worked on it more, but actually it was a work sample. I've never said this in public. It was a work sample to send to the NEA. I'm sure they looked at 30 seconds like, what? Off. So, and then, and I refined it, but I had to transfer it to video, and then that was it. It's like, okay, I can keep filming. I can release on video, which hugely dropped the expense. And then that's interesting. So it was a eureka moment, I'd say in 1984, when that just gave me everything I needed, the freedom. So, in my background, technically, like historically, I would be placed in the experimental film history catalog, but I didn't so much identify with that. A little bit at the time, because there really wasn't anything else, but I actually thought I was working in the art world. So the surrealists who could paint and also make a film, and Warhol was his own very weird films, not the later ones that he made with that were more narrative. But there were a few people who could a little bit deal with story, could be involved in the arts. But what we were doing got kind of pushed off to another side as its own special thing. That's something else we don't have to complain too much about, but I'll say, I always thought I was making art. Now, the next step was I got a job teaching at Brown. And so Todd Haynes was one of my students. So a lot of people would know who Todd Haynes is. And when he finished school and he made the first film on his own, which actually was, well, maybe I shouldn't say because it's not supposed to be shown. And it's telling a story, and it's using conventional techniques of narrative filmmaking. I was so shocked. And I said, Todd, what are you doing? Because I didn't know him that way. I knew him as a painter and fearless about making his strange works on film. And here he did this thing that was a story. And he just like really knocked me out because he said, you know, we just wanted to see if we could do it. And then he's off and running. And I thought, wow, yeah, I'm not making a feature film. Even part of it's on video. I'm actually not doing that.
Yeah.
And here I thought I was, and I'm not.
Leslie, it was interesting. I was kind of trying to situate, you know, I first saw this film in college, as I said, and it was sort of, you know, placed between this period where there was sort of complete abolishment of narrative in art films, and, you know, really abstract, minimal, stripped down material. And then, you know, there is this other wave of kind of art house cinema.
Yes.
And where you're situated is so uniquely between the two. And I just remember being so thankful. I was like, yes, like there's stuff here and I can chew on it and I can be really emotionally attached to it and intellectually challenged by it.
Yeah.
But like work through it over the years actually with you, right? Like you're working on it over the years, but as an audience member and as a viewer, I can come back to it and find all these other things that speak to me differently after, you know, being around children or whatever. And so that's really, you know, rich. But I want to use something you said about realizing that you were in this art space kind of firmly, to sort of open up from this work to the project that you and Natalie are working on now, which is this solo exhibition of your oeuvre in at MIT Liss Art Center. So can Natalie, maybe you talk about a little bit where that project starts from and what motivated you right now to want to highlight Leslie's work as well, and then kind of what some of the core themes maybe of that show are.
Yeah, so you know, one of the reasons Leslie's work appealed to me has a lot to do with something she mentioned a few minutes ago about you know, firstly this interest in the information explosion that emerged in the 1980s, but also this theme within Peggy and Fred, where, you know, you have technology that sort of escaped human control. And I feel like that's a sub-theme that runs also through some of the works that are dealing with your family's relationship to the atomic bomb development as well. So it's like, you know, this post-World War II Cold War feeling that then, you know, accelerates into the 80s and into the internet. And now in your recent works, like Cut from Liquid to Snake or Ground, you have this like even stronger excess of energy that's just sort of pulsating, but still extremely disorienting. So that's, you know, I was just really interested also in working with Leslie, so I could also unpack her work through the process of that. And that's been really fun. And the show we've put together is actually more of a survey than I originally expected it would be. And I think that is just because it's so hard to not want to include so many of her works. But it is a survey in the sense that it really traces from the earliest work to the most recent. And that means starting with works from the mid-1970s, extracts and All Right, You Guys, the latter of which was actually made while Leslie was a grad student studying at MIT. So there was a nice connection there. And of course, I loved that, you know, she was not welcomed back the following year at MIT. You know, wasn't working in the perfect cinema verite mode that they were after at that time, and I think was really pushing up against these ideas about veracity and documentary, and that's interesting to me too. So our exhibition really sort of traces a few kinds of trajectories. Some of the themes are, looking at early works, the use of language and the voice, and a kind of estrangement that can emerge in the works through the sound and audio editing. And then there's also a sort of spotlight on works that are addressing your father's relationship to atomic history and Leslie's relationship to it through her family, and also how that's unfolded over time as an archive in itself. It happens to be a family archive, but it's a very big one, as I've learned. And
Yeah.
it's a rich one. It just is. It has enough to continue to feed you new material, and that's really interesting. And what's very cool with that too is that the same archive can create new works over the years.
Right.
And I love seeing that in your work. And I tried to bring that into the show so that you do see some echoes across the space, whether it's actually the same footage that's reoccurring in different films, or just little echoes like, the amount of explosions in your work. You can hardly go 10 minutes without something exploding, and you don't notice it unless you do notice it, right?
I didn't notice it, so that's interesting.
Even just that last moment of the clip of Peggy and Fred in Kansas.
Oh yeah,
it ends with a bang.
That's right.
And, started this conversation by pointing out you're wearing a cosmonaut necklace,
yes.
And suddenly I was noticing all the flight imagery and all the, there's so much, cockpit to aerial view, and the importance of sort of, again, that inside outside relationship to these modes of power and violence, and sort of moving through being both inside and being a critic outside. I think it's really comes up in a lot of ways.
So, oh God, there's so many things I would like to say, but
we also don't have a ton of time. So I want to say, if you want to either set up these clips or just, say kind of a little bit about how we're going to share a little kind of taste of in the show.
Okay, so that's probably a good way to approach it. Sorry, we're going to show clips from 3 or 4, I can't remember. 3 works, 3, and then maybe a still from the current project. And so the first section is from a much earlier piece called "Let Me Count the Ways," and you will see the beginning minute, and it has my dad, and it is the piece in which I do a kind of observing of war, and overall, I would say I've had an interest, like an obsession and a need to try to accommodate the individuality and the person of the people who do things like make an atomic bomb or develop COVID vaccinations, and then the global aspect of that. So atomic bomb, dad, and Hiroshima and global war, and that's where we start. And it's a major part of the show, a very big opening part of the show that Natalie has curated. So the next piece, which is Cut from Liquid to Snake, I actually started that the morning somebody was elected president. Starts with T, and I think we're just showing a couple little clips from that piece, which has 5 sections, and it was made in 2018. And I do want to say, well, I guess I can wait till afterwards because we have a few more minutes to talk after, right? Yeah. So you'll get a taste of that. You'll get to see actually a family member from my family that hoards. That's why we have such a huge archive. Everybody has that gene, hoarding gene. They watch the hoarding show. I say, that's what we're like. I don't get it. What are you talking about? I don't see that. But yeah, hoarding. And then the last little clip is from a piece called Ground. And you will see, well, well, see a little bit. It's not the main, you'll see the most fun part to watch. But again, it's actually working with technology, the biggest machine in the world at the moment at CERN. And there's a hand that's helping, like using gesture to help explain what it is you're looking at. So this kind of close to home individual and Max at the same time is of tremendous interest to me. So we can start that.
Okay, that sounds great. Let's play that. Thank you.
Okay.
The quote that stands out for me there is zero human interaction. I feel like as a core concern, it's something that is as at the core of this show and a lot of your work from Peggy and Fred, as you said, onward. So thank you for honing in on that as something that we need to be concerned about for decades now, but only are, I think, publicly or perceptually waking up to as a mass conversation right now.
Right. Mm-hmm. And in fact, all right, yes, we have zero human interaction, but what's really going to be coming out in the work that I'm really deeply involved in now, after having these residencies in the last few years at CERN in Switzerland with a Large Hadron Collider, and then at Caltech with access to many different kinds of scientists and looking at many projects, but mostly in the area of physics, is that the internet makes us think there's, well, yeah, lots of interaction, and now we're reading and feeling like depleted. Like actually, it's not real. There's not enough. It's like go back outside. Use the telephone, call your friend, have actual real food together. And then that system that has exceeded governments now, right? That we've been witnessing recently, and everything that's going to have to be adjusted and attended to, lots of big decisions being made. But yeah, that's that information explosion problem. It is an explosion. But what I'm interested in is the fact that that woman was standing there with her hand. There's glass, but what she's doing, she's standing in a room that had, I don't remember how many thousands of. It's the data center at CERN, and it's old, and it's running with an old mechanical system. Actually, that's what she's talking about. How simple it was. And it's only the human hand is not there because the dust would not help. At Caltech, I got to watch the Mars rover being built. And so there's a viewing room, you can stand and look into this big white room. And there are a bunch of people in there, and they're screwing things in. And I'd go to meet with some other person who's learned how to weave by looking at a YouTube video, because he's weaving a device that's in which women are weaving a rug. He looks at that, and he's developing a device that will be going into an big antimatter project with 7 institutions involved. And I'm saying to people at Caltech, it seems like Home Depot, you guys go there a lot. He said, oh yeah, we get a lot of stuff there. At CERN, there were high school students working on parts of one of the detectors, these huge, sophisticated things, and they're putting down strips of fishing wire because it's the exact measurement they need to keep 2 plates apart from each other. So high school kids and fishing wire. When you're doing advanced research in physics, let's say, and you're looking for the proof side, which is actually requiring not just math, but machines and other cosmology, also still devices. It's like people do it and they make it. You can't order a lunar particle accelerator, please, on Amazon or any place else. Can't do it. So I'm really interested in that part. Like, it's not what you think in science. It's just not what you think. is not all made at a distance by robots yet, and it won't be.
Not hands off. It's the fantasy of hands off.
It's an unfortunate image that is accrued for whatever reason around science, especially, and technology. They're different, but that it's all just magic in some other sphere that is perfect. It's not. Like you make the wheel not work so great on the Mars rover, because you know the last Mars rover had some problems with the wheel, and you just like make it different. It's not a robot making it. It's like materials. So there's theory, and a lot of that in physics. It's like mathematical, and then there's sort of the other side, which is
Sounds a lot like media art.
It's a lot like media art. And as a person, as a teacher too, because I did teach for years, I was so on the side of make it and figure it out as you're making it. I taught in a theory program at Brown University for a long time. The students had to take media theory classes and cultural theory classes before they could sign up for my class. But they still hired me. I wasn't the theory person. I had some interest, but I could say, when you get here, you won't believe what we're going to do. It's like learning how to use a sewing machine. And theory enters this room through your work. I don't tell you, this is what's true. This might be the case. This is what I want you thinking about. You bring it in and we'll talk. So, yeah.
Fascinating. So we have two questions in the Q&A that are sort of related. So I will bring those in and say that if anybody else in the audience wants to start asking, adding to that, we can. But I also think between Natalie and I, we have tons of questions too.
Okay.
So both of these relate to the filming of Peggy and Fred, and was something that you said, is often of real interest, which is sort of how you worked with the children in terms of preparing towards, sort of whatever it was you were hoping would come out of it. Were there script readings or dry runs? And then another question sort of asking how much was scripted and rehearsed in the broadest sense, and were there retakes, was there direction, that kind of thing. So maybe bring us into the room for the filming of Peggy and Fred.
This is always 99% of the time when Peggy and Fred is shown, that is what people ask about. And first. And so at first I felt kind of threatened or annoyed by the question. And now over the years, I came to understand it as actually about something else, which is it's hard to explain the behavior. And where did it come from? So it turned out that I was good at filming cinema verite type documentary. I had been a painter. I did some photography. I was terrible at photography. Couldn't get it. Did not get that. And then I picked up a film camera working with another person in art school, Desmond Horsfield. I want to say his name because two of the films were showing at MIT. We co-authored. And I have a magnetic attachment to time, like animal magnetism attachment to things playing out in time in front of me. So in this piece in particular, which is actually the first work I filmed myself. Prior to this, I was working with Desmond on filming. What I used to say is I didn't direct what they said, I directed the set. So what I needed them to talk about, what I hoped they might talk about, I put in the set. And it kind of worked out. So if I needed them to make a phone call or say anything about the phone, I stick a phone in one day. I'm pretty sure, based on what I've noticed already, that phone is going to be picked up. That they're going to talk about a murder? No idea. Sorry, that's not scripted. I didn't stop the camera though. So basically what happened for the most of it, for most of the filming, I've got 15 hours of film footage, 16 millimeter film footage, working with them. is that I turn the camera on, and here's where the static camera business comes up that you were resonating with that hadn't occurred to me. And then I'd go into the room where I was filming and hide. And I mean, hide in that I wasn't in the frame. And I could speak to them. So there's some back and forth. I'm thinking of releasing, maybe just on YouTube, some of my offcuts in which you hear how we're speaking to each other. And they knew, they were so good that they weren't supposed to look at the camera. So I do want to mention, it was so cute that one day, Fred, Donald is his real name, he just decided like, okay, I'm trying not to look at the camera, but I really want to talk to Leslie. So out of the blue, I became Uncle Willie. So there's like all this footage where he says, oh, Uncle Willie's here. Hey, let's go talk to Uncle Willie. That's not in any of what you'll see.
All kinds of weird gender reads too.
Yeah, and so I was shooting, it was improvisation on my side and their side. And we'd talk. Like if I needed them to talk about what, Amelia Earhart, and that scene, what they knew was that we were doing a TV broadcast and that he was Jack Nicholson and she was Amelia Earhart. And I took them out for breakfast to, yes, McDonald's every day for a week and talked to them about Amelia Earhart. So they could remember the name and what she did. I needed Peggy to be a strong female character because Donald was a show-off and Peggy was very talkative until I turned the camera on. So I needed to introduce an identity for her that wasn't about speaking, but something extraordinary somebody did, Amelia Earhart. And that's, so we go in there, he's told he's the news broadcaster, he's going to interview Amelia Earhart, she's Amelia Earhart. I mean, what happened was like kind of what I thought could happen, and it happened. And yeah.
One of the reasons this question comes up, and I'd be curious Natalie's thoughts too, and sort of what else is sort of packed into that, is how little attention actually any kind of cinema or filmmaking gives to the sort of production of psychology and human beings and little people. And, you know, to see that kind of interior play and the working through and working out of socialization is something we're so unfamiliar with, that trying to actually understand what is possible within that space and how much is natural, or not natural, that's probably exactly the wrong word, but how much is sort of undirected is really interesting, because then it gets to the other point, which is how much is directed by media. And so how much you can sort of count on certain rote formulations of the family dynamic, the like, I gotta go get milk, I'm gonna be late for work. Like these are lines from television shows and they're already appearing, and the naturalness of that sort of seeming to come out of nowhere is, I think, surprising, because we don't spend a lot of time paying attention to how our children are absorbing these things.
Can I jump in? I know you were speaking to Natalie, but I just want to say, it took me a while to understand what the kids thought we were doing. And when I realized, actually it was somebody else, my partner, Tom Zimmer, he's the one who pointed it out. I was just the grateful recipient. They thought they were being actors in the television. That's how they understood their job, essentially. So this play job is play. They're learning. They are learning to be cultural subjects. They're learning to be in the world. They're learning to grow. And that was so fascinating to me, and certainly a huge part of what this project was about for me personally, and that I do hope is embodied in the work too. So back to something more personal and subjective. They could live in hell and they just did a good job. Their kids are going to make it work. And they understood themselves in our funny relationship with this weird person, Leslie, who's their next door neighbor. what we're doing is we're making a movie. Well, that means they are actors. And that's why they act the way they act. Actually, they're writing the script and producing material. And I'm, off on the side, like the dramaturgist kind of tweaking it a bit and making records. That's what happened.
Following up on that, Leslie, there's a quote that I've saved of yours about Peggy and Fred. And you say children are not quite us and not quite other.
Yeah.
They are our others and they are becoming us.
That's right. Yeah, that's
and
it.
Yeah, I mean, I love thinking through that because it reminds me of the way your work has also been contextualized through a kind of experimental ethnography.
Right.
A very different category in some ways that we didn't really touch on, but it casts you as this pseudo-neutral observer, and these children as some kind of other to be understood or studied. And yet in fact that is kind of part of the conceit of Peggy and Fred in Hell, is that they are being studied by this AI entity, right?
That's right. That's the backstory. Yeah. From the beginning. I can't believe I did this. It's in my notebooks from 1983. I gave myself this liberty to film anything with this backstory about the kids being observed by AI. I mean, I'd had some interest in AI for a while at that point. So, and the AI that shows up at the very end of the project that was completed it's 95 minutes long, completed in 2015. The kind of cut in which parts of all of these episodes, or no, some of these episodes appear. The final word is from the AI entity that had observed them. So I wrote that script and read this. I'm the performer. You don't see me, but I am. And they are being studied by this AI entity for as long as they were alive and energy was still running and TV could be there. The programming of the AI had to do with human emotion. And that I decided is the case, and there was work being done like that, and still at MIT that I knew about. So that was like the conceit. That was a conceit. Yeah. And this is a kind of benign version of AI, because the AI remained impressed by humans until the earth is so dead there's no power anymore, and it just cuts out. That's like the last thing that happens. The last line in Peggy and Fred in Hell is, "Oh, the storm." The apocalypse is a storm. In fact, it's climate. I also didn't decide, is it nuclear or is it environmental from the beginning? And I filmed for both. And then in the world we live in today, when I made that last episode called The Fold, guess what? It's climate.
Yeah, that actually has been what has resonated for me more in the past year, more so than the pandemic, is this summer watching all of our seasons, and the crazy climate changes that we're experiencing. It's hard not to project into a future where things are sort of irreversibly
and guess what?
Bad, or we just live in a kind of constant state of catastrophe.
Right. And guess what? That goes back to humankind. And do we want to say the earth is was an organism? But if this isn't a machine, but there's actually lots of machines and lots of ways of conducting this world.
Right. And feedback systems, right? So that, think about some of the interest of sort of what data is going out and what's being learned from it. There's ways in which we can understand it that way. But this makes me wonder, because you mentioned that during this pandemic, Leslie, you were sort of turning more to nature, and that inspired this next epic that you think will sort of take many years of your life and also perhaps have an episodic structure. And so in the last couple of minutes, we don't have another audience question. So I thought I'd give you a chance to talk a little bit about Hemlock. But again, on the short side, and then we'll have to close up for the evening.
Okay, can we put that one still up that has
Sure.
the writing and the tree?
Cal, can you pull that up? Yeah, great.
Yeah, okay. All right, so this is just that I'm really only just beginning on this project, but I thought this was a good image to share because what you're looking at is a little bit of a many-page notebook that I found when I was at Caltech, in which studies of various things, airplane parts, and some military things. This is about a wind tunnel in Langley, and it covers this notebook of just logging in to do experiments. Covers starts in 1950 and it goes through 61, and then I have another one that goes up to 87, and it's still you hand write in. It's not a computer. It's not. I don't know if anyone ever bothered. Why would they putting this data? It's just a sign-in sheet, but it just covers so much. The reason I found it is it actually includes a wind tunnel test of the project my dad did, was in charge of it at GE, which was a nuclear powered airplane. So growing up, that was my dad's job. He was the technical director of that project, which was canceled in the early 60s. So yes, I had spent a lot of COVID time last year in New Hampshire, and I did grow up also in the countryside, but not in deep woods so much, in Ohio, southern Ohio. And I was very surprised by how that world of the forest became so rich for me. And I did start taking images, not photographs, I wouldn't call it that, but I became super tuned in to the forest. And I developed what I call tree eyes, because even when I got back to New York finally, at the beginning of January 2021, my husband and I kept saying, look at that tree. I wasn't looking at anything. I said, we have tree eyes. Oh my God, look at that bark. So what's happening here? So I don't know yet, because I'm just doing it. I'm just starting, and we will be showing the first completed passage of this big project entitled Hemlock as part of the MIT exhibition. And that will be at the opening, at the big opening of the show on October 21st. Currently, the exhibition is actually open as a preview at MIT List, but this new piece will be mounted then. And here you have, again, it's not all going to look like this, but this was just an easy one to point to. You have a number of different people over a number of years handwriting something in that refers to some big deal, actually. It's some big deal. You know, it's private commerce as well. You'll see Boeing, you see corporations' names, but it is basically, it's mostly military industrial complex, mostly, not all. Sometimes the machine breaks down, so part of the log will be like something broke. Actually, it's here, found cracks in motion shafts and routers, so they shut down for a while. I like that too. I like this evidence. And so it's going to be really complicated and really simple what I do with this coming passage. And currently I'm calling it Hemlock, handmade. That's where I'm starting.
That's beautiful. And it, I think, just circles back to so much of what we've talked about. And I also think the idea of sort of simplicity and complexity at play in your work is something that we've seen over and over.
Great.
And thank you for plugging the MIT show so so that I don't have to, but I think we included information in the chat, Natalie.
I should clarify too that we're presently in a phased reopening. So access is allowed for MIT community who is in the COVID pass system, but come September, we plan to be open to general public. And the official exhibition opening is October, as Leslie mentioned.
Wonderful. Well, I will plan to see you there post-October sometime with all the safety protocols in place. But But in the meantime, I'm so glad that we could have this time to share cyberspace together and talk about the work in the way that time-based media allows us to do with some of these clips. And thank you, Leslie, for putting those together for us. And Natalie for joining the conversation. I also want to thank behind the scenes our SIAV team, Cal, Brandon, and KJ, and Priya, our community moderator, and our captioners for today, all helping to make this possible. Please mark your calendar for the next viewfinder with another brilliant artist, Laurel Nakadade, who will be in 2 conversations also with 2 curators on September 2nd. And Priya will drop the link into the chat so you can register. And I finally want to thank the Women's History Initiative for supporting this series and letting us do this once a month. So thank you everyone for joining. Have a wonderful evening. Enjoy your night. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.